The call came at 6:47 in the morning from a neighbor 3 miles down the county road. Earl Whitaker was already at the kitchen table with his coffee when the phone rang. He picked it up on the second ring. The voice on the other end was not calm. It was a man named Dale Henson, who farmed the soybean parcel north of Earl's place, and Dale was breathing hard like he had been running. He said there were 2 flatbed trucks parked at the edge of Earl's south field. He said one of them had a winch on it. He said there were 3 men in dark windbreakers, and one of them was bolting a yellow tag onto the side of Earl's tractor, the John Deere 4440 that Earl had bought in 1981 and rebuilt twice. Dale said the windbreakers had 3 letters across the back. He said them slowly so Earl would understand. IRS. Earl set the coffee down. He did not stand up right away. He looked through the kitchen window toward the south field, though from the house you could not see that far. Then he asked Dale one question. He asked what the number on the tag said. Dale read it out. $87,412. Earl thanked him, hung up the phone, and walked to the closet where he kept his coat. Earl Whitaker was 71 years old. He had lived on 184 acres in Decatur County, Iowa for 49 years. He had bought the land in pieces between 1976 and 1989, the first 60 acres with money he had saved from 3 tours overseas, the rest with bank loans he had paid off one harvest at a time. He had served 2 tours in Vietnam, and one in a place the government did not officially admit he had been. He had come back in the spring of 1973, quieter than when he left, and had worked one season as a hired hand on a neighbor's farm before deciding that he would never again work land that someone else could take from him. He met Ruth in 1975 at a county fair. They married 11 months later. She had been a bookkeeper at the grain co-op for 16 years before they were married, and she kept books for their farm the same way she had kept them for the co-op, meticulously, in pencil, in ledgers she labeled by year on the spine in her own handwriting. Ruth Whitaker died in 2019 of a stroke that took her in her sleep. Earl had been married to her for 43 years. He had not moved her things out of the office she kept in the back of the farmhouse. The ledgers were still on the shelf where she had left them. Ruth had kept 22 ledgers in total. The first was from 1976. The last was from 2018. Inside each one, every payment had a date. Every check had a number. Every receipt had been cross-referenced against a bank statement she had reconciled by hand on the last day of every month. Ruth had not done it for the IRS. She had done it because that was how she did it. There had been 3 years in the early 1980s when corn prices collapsed, and Earl had taken a second job at a grain elevator in Leon to make the loan payments. He had worked nights from October through March, 4 months on, 8 months off, for 9 consecutive years. He had missed his daughter's 7th birthday. He had missed his own father-in-law's funeral. He had missed a Christmas. The last loan payment cleared on a Friday in March of 1989. Ruth had circled the date in red pencil on the kitchen calendar. His father had rented his whole life. His father had moved the family 11 times before Earl turned 18. His father had died in a small apartment above a feed store in 1968 with $300 to his name and no land to leave anyone. Earl had made a quiet promise to himself, in a rice paddy outside Hue in 1970, that whatever else happened, he would not die the way his father had. He had kept that promise for 53 years. Behind the house at the top of the rise stood a single white oak tree more than 200 years old by the county's last survey. Under that tree, on a small fenced plot Earl had cleared himself, was Ruth's grave. He had stood there every Sunday morning for 6 years, in every kind of weather, and had not yet missed one. By 7:15 that morning, Earl was standing at the edge of the south field in the same coat he had worn to Ruth's funeral. The 3 men in the windbreakers had already winched the tractor onto the flatbed. The yellow tag was visible from 30 feet away. Earl did not raise his voice. He asked which of them was in charge. A man with a clipboard turned around. He looked Earl up and down once, the way a man does when he has been told what to expect, and the person in front of him matches the description. The man's name was Bradley Kearns. He was a field collections officer with the Internal Revenue Service, Des Moines District. He was 36 years old. He handed Earl a folder of paperwork without saying much, and what he said was procedural. There was a deficiency assessment from tax year 2018 with accumulated penalties and interest totaling $87,412. Notices had been sent. Deadlines had passed. The agency was now exercising its statutory right to seize and sell personal property to satisfy the debt. Earl asked to see the notices. Kearns said they had been mailed to the address on file. Earl asked which address. Kearns read it out. It was an address Earl had not lived at since 1991. Earl did not argue. He took the folder. He watched the flatbed pull out of the field, the John Deere strapped down with yellow nylon, and he stood there for a long time after the trucks had gone. Then he walked back to the house, sat down at the kitchen table, and opened the folder. The deficiency was for a tax year 7 years past. The agency claimed Earl had failed to report income from a land sale, a 12-acre parcel he had sold to a neighbor in 2018 for $94,000. The agency had calculated the basis at zero, treating the entire sale as taxable gain. With penalties for failure to file and failure to pay, plus interest accrued over 6 years, the figure had grown to $87,412. Earl read the file twice. Then he stood up, walked to the back office where Ruth had kept her books, and opened the drawer of the metal desk she had used for 40 years. In the bottom drawer, in a manila envelope marked 1979 in her handwriting, was a single folded letter on the letterhead of the Internal Revenue Service. He had not looked at it in 38 years. Ruth had filed it, the way she filed everything, the year it had arrived. He sat down in her chair and unfolded it slowly. The letter was dated April 11, 1979. It was a notice of basis determination, issued by an IRS field office in Omaha, in response to a request Earl had submitted that February. The letter confirmed, in the precise and unbeautiful language of Federal Tax Administration, that the basis of Earl's 184-acre Decatur County property had been established at $214,000 for the purposes of any future capital gains calculation. It was signed by a regional director whose name had appeared on official correspondence for 2 decades. It was stamped. It was on file. Bradley Kearns had spent, by Earl's later count, 11 minutes on Earl's case. The casework log Earl would eventually obtain through a Freedom of Information request showed the entry. 11 minutes to review 6 years of correspondence. 11 minutes to order the seizure of a tractor that Earl had owned for 42 years. Kearns had been promoted into field collections 16 months earlier. He had a bachelor's degree in finance from a state university in Missouri and an internal certification in asset recovery he had completed in 8 weekends. His evaluations, also obtained later, ranked agents on a metric called case resolution velocity. Kearns had closed 218 cases in the previous fiscal year. The district average was 94. He had been named to a quarterly performance list 4 times in a row. The men and women whose cases Kearns closed were, on average, 68 years old. Their cases, on average, involved property held for more than 30 years. The agency had no record of the 1979 letter in its current case file. The agency had migrated its record system in 1994, then again in 2007, then again in 2019. Files predating the 1994 migration had been retained in regional archives, but were not searchable from the agent's current terminals. To find the 1979 letter from the agency's side, an officer would have had to request a manual archive search. The request form was 4 pages long. The average turnaround time was 9 months. No one had filed one. There was no malice in Bradley Kearns's 11 minutes. There was a system that rewarded 11 minutes. The next morning, before he drove to the lawyer's office, Earl made one phone call. He called the Des Moines district office at 8:01 a.m. and asked to speak with Bradley Kearns. He was put on hold for 19 minutes. When Kearns came on the line, Earl told him in plain language that he had a 1979 letter from the IRS itself confirming the basis on his property and that the deficiency assessment was wrong. He could hear Kearns typing while he spoke. When Earl finished, Kearns laughed once. A short laugh, not loud, the kind of laugh a man makes when he is amused but is also trying to be polite. There were 2 other voices in the background of the call, an open-plan office, agents at adjacent desks. One of them said something Earl could not make out, and Kearns laughed again. Then Kearns said on the line words Earl would later repeat to Margaret Hennessy verbatim. He said, "Sir, "We don't operate off 40-year-old letters from drawers." He said, "The seizure is final." Earl thanked him, hung up, and got in his truck. The lawyer's name was Margaret Hennessy. She was 58 years old, had practiced tax law for 31 years, and had a daughter who had been in Earl's daughter's grade school class. She looked at the 1979 letter for a long time without speaking. Then she looked at the deficiency assessment. Then she looked at the 1979 letter again. She told Earl plainly that she was not sure the letter would be enough. The agency, she said, would argue that basis determinations from that era were not always honored under current procedures. She said the letter was strong, but the IRS had a great deal of discretion in how it interpreted its own historical correspondence. She said it would likely take a year, possibly 2. She said it would cost money.
She did not say it would win.
Earl asked her one question. He asked her if the letter said what he thought it said. She told him yes. He said, "Then we file it." Margaret Hennessy filed the response on a Tuesday in late October. The filing included the original 1979 letter, scanned and certified. It included Ruth's ledgers from 1976 through 2018, which documented every payment, every improvement, every tax filing. It included Earl's military service records, which were not legally relevant, but which Margaret included anyway because she had practiced long enough to know what mattered to a reviewing officer who would read the file at 4 in the afternoon. The filing was 47 pages. It was sent by certified mail to the Des Moines District Office, with a copy to the IRS Office of Chief Counsel. The agency's response came by phone on the Friday of that same week. Margaret Hennessy had been practicing tax law for 31 years, and she had never received a call from the IRS Office of Chief Counsel in less than 6 months on any matter. The call came in 3 days. That speed told her everything. The man on the phone was a senior counsel in the Office of Chief Counsel in Washington. He did not give his full name on the first call. He said only that the agency had reviewed the filing, that the 1979 basis determination letter appeared to be authentic, and that the agency would be issuing a formal response within 5 business days. Margaret asked what the response would say. The senior counsel said he was not in a position to characterize the response in advance. Margaret thanked him, hung up, and called Earl. The formal letter arrived the following Wednesday. It was 3 pages long. It acknowledged the validity of the 1979 basis determination. It conceded that the 2018 land sale, calculated against the established basis of $214,000 for the full 184 acres, produced a proportional basis for the 12-acre parcel of approximately $13,950. The actual taxable gain on the sale was therefore not $94,000, but $80,050. The federal tax owed on that gain, at Earl's marginal rate, was $12,008. Earl had, in fact, paid $11,400 in estimated tax in the year of the sale, which the agency had failed to credit. The remaining liability was $608. The letter went on. The agency formally withdrew the deficiency assessment of $87,412. It acknowledged that the seizure of the John Deere 4440 had been executed under an erroneous determination. The tractor would be returned within 10 business days, at agency expense, to the location from which it had been removed. The agency further acknowledged that statutory damages were owed under Internal Revenue Code Section 7433, which permits civil action against the United States for unauthorized collection actions. The agency offered a settlement of $340,000 in lieu of litigation, payable within 60 days. Margaret Hennessy called Earl that afternoon and read him the letter twice. Earl listened both times without interrupting. When she was finished, he asked her one question. He asked whether the agency had apologized. Margaret told him gently that the IRS does not issue apologies. She said the settlement was the apology. Earl said he understood. He accepted the settlement. The check arrived in early December. The tractor was returned 8 days later on a flatbed that pulled into the same field from which it had been taken, and the same yellow tag was still bolted to its side. The driver, a man Earl had never seen before, asked if he wanted help unbolting it. Earl said no. He said he would do it himself. He did not do it that day. He left the tag where it was for 2 more days, walking past it each morning when he went out to feed the cattle. On the third morning, he went to the workshop, found a half-inch socket wrench, and removed the 4 bolts that held the tag to the tractor's frame. He carried the tag into the house and set it on the kitchen table. Then he sat down across from it and looked at it for a long time. That afternoon, Earl walked up the rise behind the house, past the barn to the white oak tree. The fenced plot was clean. He had been there the previous Sunday. He stood at the foot of Ruth's grave for a while without saying anything. Then he said one line quietly, the way a man speaks when he is not sure if anyone is listening, but he is going to say it anyway. He said, "You filed it where I could find it." He stood there for another minute. Then he turned and walked back down the rise, past the barn to the house. He sat at the kitchen table with the yellow tag in front of him. He did not throw it away. He folded the 1979 letter back along the same creases Ruth had folded it on 4 decades earlier and put it back in the manila envelope marked 1979 in her handwriting. He returned the envelope to the bottom drawer of her desk. He closed the drawer. The land Earl Whitaker stood on that evening was the same land he had bought in 1976, the same land Ruth had kept the books for, the same land his father had never owned a single acre of. The 1979 letter, the one Ruth had filed when no one had asked her to, the one Earl had not looked at in 38 years, had been worth $340,608 in the end. But Earl did not think of it that way. He thought of it the way Ruth had thought of everything she filed. You keep the paper because someday the paper is the only thing left that tells the truth. The agency's record system has been migrated 4 times since 1979. Each migration loses a percentage of its predecessor's files. The percentage is small. The number of letters lost is not. Earl Whitaker is one man with one letter that survived because his wife filed it in a drawer the agency could not migrate. There are others. There are men and women in their 70s, on land their families have worked for generations, who received letters in the 1970s and 1980s confirming basis determinations, agreements, settlements, and clearances. Letters the agency itself no longer has. Some of those people kept the letters. Some did not. The ones who did not have already lost what Earl almost lost. Their stories are coming. The next one is a woman in Nebraska, 74 years old, whose husband filed a property tax appeal in 1983 that the county forgot, until they tried to take her house in 2024. She has the appeal. She has the stamp. She has the date. What happened when she walked into the county courthouse with a folder her husband had labeled in pencil is the next story on this channel. Subscribe. These letters are still surviving in drawers all across this country, and we are going to find them. Paste your script.